afternoon, better said, and welcome to the third Australasian Core Facility meeting. So for those who don't know me, my name is Ralph Skidnam, and I'm the director of the Proteomics and Metabolomics facility located at Monash University. And I would really like to thank each and every one of you for being here with us today. That's really fantastic. And actually, so now a couple of years ago, when Ben and I we started this the Australasian Core Facility meeting, we were sort of expecting that after the second or third year, it slowly dies down. We start with 20 participants, and then the third one we're down at its tier, and we have to call it a day. But it's because of this, it's absolutely great to see that actually the number of registrants and hopefully also attendees is rather increasing than decreasing in comparison to the last year. So that's really fantastic. So also, before we get started, I would also like to say thanks to Melanie White. I think quite a few know Melanie, but she actually kindly volunteered and agreed to be today's Zoom host and facilitator. So, and she will do her magic, and then we suddenly disappear in breakout rooms and come back. So thanks a lot, Mel, for this. This is really much appreciated. So also a few housekeeping things, and I guess you're all also sick about this because I can imagine every one of us has spent more than enough time in Zoom meetings last year. But still, I say it, please, if you're not speaking, please mute yourselves. It really helps a lot reducing the background noise. And if you have questions, either please type it in the chat. So Mel, Ben, and I, we will try to monitor the chat function and try to pick these questions up pretty quickly. Alternatively, you can also, if you go to reactions, raise your hand. You can virtually raise your hands and ask the question, okay? So before we go to the first session, just let me briefly set the scene about the Australasian Core Facility meeting. Can you please mute yourself? Yeah, thank you. So I mean, for those who attend the first time, so what Ben and I try to do over the last couple of years, we really try to bring together leaders and experts in core facility management and operation, especially from the Australasia, New Zealand region, to not only discuss, ideas and share best practice approaches, but also to explore ways to really foster collaboration, to find out ways how we can work together and really to tackle the challenges of running a core facility together rather than individually, because I'm pretty sure all of us have the same problems. So I'm also trying to do this here on with the third Australasian Core Facility meeting. And we have come up with the following program, and I guess you've seen it on the introductory slide. But just in brief, we have 3 sessions today. Each session is scheduled for roughly 1 hour, which is followed by a 10-minute break, and just to stretch your legs and to get something to drink and something to eat. And the 3 sessions are going to be: first, Ben will talk about the 2020 survey that was sent out to all facilities last year. In the second session, Ben and I would like to explore with you and discuss with you one of the ideas we recently had, which we named the ACF multi-center testing initiative. So all about this initiative in the second session. And the third session is actually, we're going to have we called it the Great Instrument Debate, where Adam Carroll and Owen Duncan will have a presidential style debate talking about, instruments, and no idea yet who's Trump and who's Biden, but I mean, I guess we will see this in the third session. So, okay, so without further ado, so please let me introduce actually the co-chair and co-founder of this meeting, Ben Crossett from the University of Sydney. And he will kick off the first session by summarizing for us and talking about the 2020 ACF survey. And before I hand over to Ben, really, I would also like to take this opportunity to say thanks to Ben, because probably all of you don't know, but he did all the hard yards. So he was really instrumental in getting the survey out, in compiling all of the results, and in sending the personalized results to all of you. So thank you very much, Ben, for this. And yeah, I hope you all enjoyed the meeting. And Ben, over to you to kick off the first session.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully that's come through. Yeah, so thank you, Ralph, for that very kind introduction as well. I mean, it's a key thing. This is always a team effort, and there's always plenty of people involved. So I'd just like to get my slides to advance. There we go. A little bit of a lag. So yeah, I was going to kick off with the acknowledgements, and particularly thank Ralph for all his contributions and hard work over the years in keeping these core facility meetings going, and hopefully you find them as useful as we find them. The survey, we had a kind of a brains trust, particularly with Paula and Mark, who have been helping out a lot in the design and construction of these surveys. We've got some beta testers, you know who you are, but particularly shout to Matt Padula, Tara, Esteban, they all tested the survey. And obviously a big thank you to the 27 facilities who took a fairly considerable amount of time out to fill in the survey, and it's been a real fascinating job chewing over the results that came in and putting them together. So I think it's been really worth the effort. And I've got to give a very big thank you. I'm hugely indebted to Naveed at Sydney University, who's put together a lot of the graphics that we see in this talk today and helped bring the data to life in a visualization. So let's just have a look at the background for all of this. So the first survey went out in 2019 and was presented at the very inaugural meeting that was part of the HUPO Adelaide meeting. And then in our second meeting, we had a fun session called You Can't Ask That, where we got everyone to chip in with what they thought would be an appropriate or an inappropriate question. And that really helped shape the survey that we then constructed in RedCap, and sent out in September of this year. So this is what we're presenting, or I'm presenting today, is the feedback from all of the facilities that we got tagged up here on the map. So we had 27 people responded. If you click at counting, you'll recognize there's not 27 logos up there. That's because some universities have more than one facility. But we've got a very good national coverage. And so I think, whilst we did send it to 32 facilities, I think we've got enough of a coverage to get a really clear picture, certainly for Australia. It'd be nice to bring in our friends across the Tasman in future surveys. But we've got a really good indication of what's going on in Australia. So if you were a MUC-spec facility, an average facility in Australia, what would you look like? So generally you would be 2/3 a university and you'd be 1/3 a research institute. Out of the people who responded, we didn't get anyone who didn't fit into either one of those two boxes. You would have 5.5 members of staff, of which 2 of them would be academics and just over 3 of them would be professional staff. You'd have a thin sliver of 1/3 of an administrator, and in the lab you would have almost 2 triple quads and almost 2 QTOFs. You'd have 1.5 quadruple Orbitrap formats, so kind of Q-exactive instrument. You'd have a single quad, and you'd nearly have a whole trigrid. You'd also have a big box of bits of other instruments. So there's quite a range of different instruments out there, but they're scattered across different facilities, and no one facility on average has more than a whole one. And one of your instruments would have been brand new in the preceding year, 2019. So that gives us sort of an overview of an average facility. 1 in 7 of the facilities has a formal NATA style accreditation. And interestingly, 1 in 6 facilities were planning on trying to get accreditation in 2020. So interesting to find out in future surveys whether those plans have gone ahead, or whether, like many things, they've been altered by COVID and pandemics and haven't gone as planned. So whilst looking at everything at an average level gives you a bit of a feel for what's going on, it's nice to drill down into the data. So one of the questions we asked was to look at what software packages people have. And over 35 different packages were reported, which I think highlights one of that common bugbears we all have, is there's just so many options out there. Which is the best? Which should you be using? We can see here that Skyline was the single most popular package out of all of our responses, but I kind of get the feeling that for a lot of these open source packages like Skyline or MaxQuant, they're relatively underreported. You don't track them in the same way that you track a licensed software where package like, say, Proteome Discoverer, where you're paying a significant amount per copy, and therefore you're going to have fewer of those copies. Other than that, there was not a lot of difference between the facilities. So if you looked at each individual facility, most of them would have a smattering of different packages. There's a broad reflection of whether they're a metabolomics-y focused facility or a proteomics facility, but there's no clear correlation between facilities that own one particular platform would go with one particular package. And so there's a lot of options out there, and everyone's basically trying to cover their bases with having a whole wide range of packages. So the next area, which is always very close to people's heart, is billing. How do you bill? Do you bill? What are the different options? And so we asked people to report whether they were fee-for-service types of billing, and that we gave them the options of either per sample or per hour billing. Whether they went after Nick Williams's favorite model of subscription. And so there's that option. And we also had self-serve. So this is the train the user model, where you're training people up and then you let them loose on your instruments, and people bill either per sample or per hour for that one. And there was another option. So you can see how down the bottom here, we did get 3 groups where they do a substantial amount of other styles of billing. We asked them for a bit more detail, and basically other seems to translate as free. So we all want to track down these guys and send all your samples there because it will cost you nothing. The next sort of glade of users, you could say, or facility styles, are these subscription users, and it goes from the 100% completely committed to that model to others where they blend it in with a subscription option, but some people are doing the per hour billing. Next up, you can see how we've got this cluster, quite a substantial cluster, who are focused very much on the fee-for-service model. That's their chosen approach. And they either go 100% on the per sample billing, which has some kind of logic to me, or they're doing the fee-for-service, but then they just charge for the total amount of instrument time that they're doing, or you got these guys where they're doing a blend of some per sample and some per hour billing. And then I think the largest group, depending on how you look at the gradient, some have almost 90% very dominated per hour billing, and then you get other guys who, I mean, these guys here, they spread their bet, they do a bit of everything, and you got this gradation in between the two where you've got a increasing amount of largely per hour billing, and a tapering of fee-for-service or per sample billing. So I think this is really one of the big take-homes from the survey, is there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution for these things. There isn't a best way of doing it, and it's a matter of choosing a method of working that works for you, works for your facility, works for your setup. And I think we can all learn from that and look at talk to each other and see what, why do people go down one particular route, and what's the advantage of that versus the advantages of a different package. And then with that knowledge, you can then choose one that's best appropriate to your facility. So within this kind of user billing area, we also ask people, where did their users come from? So we look at the pink side of the slide here, the type of user, and so pink, and they're either students or academics, and surprisingly enough, given that university research focus to the people who responded to the survey, vast bulk of users come from academia. In blue, you got the commercial users, and so there are a couple of facilities nationally who are really tapping into that commercial market. They've also got good tie-ins with their local industry, and we also tried to tease out the level of clinical versus other academic users. And so you can see here, we've got one particular facility who have a very strong clinical focus and are doing a lot of a large portion of more than half of their user base comes from a clinical basis. And then there's a smattering of users who have other customers. On the other side of this slide, we also looked at where do your users come from. So the orangey hues are your host department or your host institution, which unsurprisingly forms the major focus to the groups. And then you got in pale green your local city, so other universities from within your town, and local state is the green one. So you can see how a couple of facilities will have quite substantial across state coverage. And then we also ask people, well, do you go take in people from outside your state, within Australia, across the rest of the world, and within that, do you particularly target, say, the Asia Pacific market? So it's interesting, you've got one facility here, a very international focus, and they've gone over half of their customers are international. Whereas for the majority of facilities, it's either at most within their town or state, and then a thin sliver of people come from outside the state, either within Australia or elsewhere in the world. So I think probably most of that is not a surprise to most of us, and you can see how most facilities are broadly the same. So the next area we moved on to was a brief question about how does your external academics and commercial rates compare relative to your internal rates. So we had one facility where internal was free and therefore everything else was an infinite increase. But for most facilities where they charge their internals one rate, if it's within the academic community, they seem to charge somewhere around 50% more for people outside of their facility. And then there's a much bigger spread when looking at how much more people charge the commercial users. And it would certainly be interesting to try and work out whether, is this due to a variation in the level that people charge their internal users? Like for these guys where they're charging 600% more for their commercial, is that because their internals are very, very low? Or are they really milking those companies for every cent possible? So that's an interesting little sub-discussion. Most facilities have a revenue goal for each year, and relative to 2019, the bulk of facilities, their goal was at the same level. A fair number, their goal went up, and then for a handful of facilities, their goal for 2020 went down. We also asked people, what do they do with the money that they bring in? And the number one response, this was a ranking question where we just asked people to say what was their ranking order of their use of these options. And the most popular rank, well, the number one rank was they used the income revenue to reduce their deficit. After that, a lot of people received all of their revenue to spend at their discretion. And a decreased number were also able to carry over that revenue from one year to another. And this is certainly a fun topic for us, is internal accounting rules. And for us, we don't have that ability to carry funds from one year to another, which can cause issues. A smaller number managed to receive all of it. Some of them got none of it. It was all confiscated. And then there was a few other options. So yeah, there's quite a spread of differences in how people use their revenue and what do they use it for. Next area, we talked a little bit about planning and asked people how far ahead did they plan for different areas. And the top, unsurprisingly, the most area where people invest time, nearly 3 years on average, is instrument capacity. Everyone's thinking ahead for that area, followed by staff capacity, which kind of fits. These are the hard baskets to fill in terms of getting more instruments or more staff. And then around the 2-year mark for planning for data analysis and fee-for-service work. And the bit that people do the most reactive planning for is self-service, so 1.5 years on average the facilities plan ahead for that area. Always a little bit of a surprise for me is the fact that 70% of facilities do not do any level of customer satisfaction monitoring. Partly, I guess, because we're all fairly time poor and it takes a lot of time to run those types of surveys, or is it just the feedback you get is not particularly useful? But yeah, there's 22% of facilities do plug away at trying to gain feedback from their users, whereas the majority do not. So a big chunk of the survey was on staff, and all up, there's over 140 full-time equivalent personnel working in a mass spectrometry core facility across the country, which I think is quite an impressive number. And the number of full-time equivalents at each facility has a big range. It goes all the way down from the one-person shows up to these, what I would call a mega facility, where you have over 10 members of staff within the facility, and there's quite a distinct group of that. So you can see here we've also color-coded the facilities that are in a geo group of 8 university, and there's no particular correlation, I don't feel, between the group of 8 facilities being on either larger or smaller or middle ranking. There's a good spread all the way across that. So after that, we did ask people what gender their staff was, and we have basically an almost perfect balance. It's almost exactly one. If you look across all staff in all facilities, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. There is a caveat to that. So our academic staff are exclusively female, 100% female. So we've got a big gender skew in one direction. And if you look at our academic staff, there's a slight skew to male. So 60% of academic FTE were male, 40% female. So but overall, we have an even split if you look at all staff. The other interest, so this is this gender divide there. And we also then went on to look at the different types of position between academic in green, professional in red, and orange is the administrative staff. And it's interesting, I mean, obviously when you've only got one person, I kind of feel that these guys are probably wearing quite a few hats and doing administration, doing academic side of things, and doing professional side of things, but their appointment is to one area. But even when you get the groups that have much larger staff counts, there's still a variation where they can be entirely professional staff or entirely academic staff. So this is another area where there's obviously not a one-size-fits-all solution, and different university HR departments have, or different faculties or research portfolios have a different policy in place as to how they feel they should be classifying the role of the staff who man mass spectrometry facilities. And it's interesting how there's a relatively few facilities have a dedicated administrative person. And so there's only there's even fewer who have more than one full-time. A lot of them are in part-time positions. So that was the staff assignment. And the last area we looked at with staffing was what type of contracts are people on. So we did ask if people used any casual staff, but we didn't get any responders in that area. And there's quite a split between continuing staff and, staff on continuing contracts and staff on fixed-term contracts, with a few facilities going all out, everyone's on fixed-term contracts, and then there's a couple of facilities where they're all on continuing positions, and then the usual blend with different ones at different rates. Overall, it's an interesting correlation exists between the staff position and the contract. So the academics are quite typically on fixed-term contracts, Whereas if you want a continuing contract, you want to take a professional staff positions, they on average they will have a distinct advantage in that area in terms of the probability of getting a continuing role, and the administrative was more of an even balance. So yeah, so it was quite a complex part of the survey, but I think it gives us real insight into how our staffing levels are structured and how it varies across the country. So we also went on to ask people what type of mass spectrometer they have and how many of each type do they have. So these were the classifications we gave everyone, ranging from TOF-TOFs, single quads, through to ion traps and FTICR instruments. And there's over 200 instruments reported, so that's quite a good inventory, I think, for the country. And the most popular single type of instrument is an Orbitrap. If you group both the trigrid and the quadrupole Orbitrap instruments together into one class, with 31% of instruments containing an Orbitrap, followed by, unsurprisingly, triple quads, were the second most popular instrument class, with almost nothing between them and QTOFs, as neck and neck on around that 24% mark. And then after that, there was quite a long trail of the other instrument groups. So we did ask people how many of their instruments were new in 2019. And so these numbers, again, the orange numbers here are the group of 8 universities, and the grey numbers, the non-group of 8 universities. And there's an even split. It's not like if you're in the group of 8, you get a new instrument, or you were more likely to get a new instrument in 2019. It's across the spread. You can see how a couple of facilities have obviously went through a big expansion that year. They got the vast majority of their instruments in 2019, whereas for most facilities, it's a small percentage. They'll get 1 or maybe 2 instruments that are being added. But overall, if you look at it, then 2 out of 3 facilities had something new that year. It'll be interesting to see how that renewal rate or expansion rate continues going forward. I think we're in much colder financial climates than we were in 2019. But it shows that there's a lot of money being invested. All right, so we drilled down a little bit further on that topic and quizzed people about where they got their funding from. And interestingly, 74% of funding came from within the host institute, with a fairly small slice of only 17% coming from federal grants, and a thin sliver of the pie coming from state grants, and then an even thinner slice for philanthropy and other sources. So yeah, interesting, very dominant funding there coming from within the institute, putting the hard cash into instrument investment. The last area that I want to really focus on in this segment is the staff to instrument ratio. And so if we rank facilities by their staff ratio, we can see how there's quite a spread, with a handful of instruments where they have over 2 staff per mass spectrometer, down to quite a long tail here where you've got 1 member of staff looking after up to 5 instruments. So a big spread there. And again, no distinct correlation between the group of 8 facilities and the others. It's everyone's are in different boats. And the other interesting part here, so this is that total staff appointments broken down by type, and then the instruments again still broken down by type. And there's no real correlation. It's not like the big facilities have the big staffing numbers, or the small facilities have small staffing ratios. If you look at it as you get some here where you've got 1 mass spec and two staff to to funnel into it. Some have a 1-to-1 ratio. The average overall is about a 0.6 ratio. So that book mass spec facility, you have 2 staff looking after 3 instruments is the typical one. Right. Where's my slides have jammed up again. Okay, so maintenance is obviously a key issue for all of us. And so we asked people what proportion of their instruments were on either a full maintenance contract, preventative only maintenance contract, no prepaid cover, and other. And again, we get an interesting spread where there's only 3 facilities that are either exclusively or largely no prepaid cover. You've got this one where there's quite a dominant no prepaid cover, and then you get a lot where they either have a blend with a couple of instruments off contract and some on, but the majority of people do have a fairly high level of prepaid cover. And I was curious about these instruments that have gone down that what I would call self-insure route, where they're doing not just reactive maintenance, they're probably doing their own preventative maintenance, but they're covering all of the costs themselves rather than hedging their bets, as it were, and taking out a maintenance contract. I was curious to know as whether do they have a higher staffing level to cover this higher level of maintenance that they would be doing. And there's a couple of facilities where they certainly have an above average level of staffing. So the average is 0.6, and you've got these guys that have a 1-to-1 ratio, and they're doing a lot of self-insurance. But then there's a couple that break the rules. So you've got these guys where they've got nine instruments, but they also have a very low staff count. So they're doing an awful lot of work. And these guys, again, you have the average staff count, but they're doing not all, but largely most of their maintenance in-house out of their own budget, not out of a prepaid cover, which comes back to that recurring theme of different facilities take a different approach on this. So the final segment of the survey was all kind of forward-looking. Where do you see the world going? What were your predictions for 2020? Which is a bit of a cheat when you're asking people in September, but most people felt that their staff count was going to remain the same, and quite a large portion thought they were optimistic they were going to increase their staff count, and there were a few pessimists who were fearing they were going to be losing staff. The average staff change, if it did change, was 1.8 FTE. We asked people what they thought about their users, with, again, the majority feeling it's probably going to be steady as she goes. A good proportion hoping that it was going to go up, and a few pessimists, slightly larger slice of pessimists, thinking it was going to go down. And again, the average change in user numbers was expected to be around 26%. And fee for service, this gives pretty similar outcome. More people were thinking it was going to remain steady, similar proportion feeling it was going to go up, and there's fewer were pessimistic it would go down. Again, this average change, people were expecting around 16% change in numbers. So obviously this was midway through the pandemic, so people might have been hedging their bets a little bit by then. I think if we'd asked people in January, they probably might have been more bullish. So we had quite a fun question where we asked who's got more than 50K to spend on instruments, equipment in 2020, and half the facilities did have some money burning a hole in their pocket. And we asked them what they were hoping to spend on. So this is one not to share with the vendors at the moment, as these procurement, well, presumably now the procurements have wrapped up. And yeah, there's quite an interest in Orbitraps. These guys obviously going hard on GCMS. Shimadzu were doing well, interested around the timsTOFs, synapse, some people going into sample preparation. So quite a spread. There didn't seem to be a clear focus or a clear winner where everyone was putting their money into one particular technology. So, I mean, there's not many people, well, not everyone certainly has money to spend. So we also ask people, if money was no object, what would you go shopping for? Which I thought was one of the more fun questions. And all these red ones are Orbi traps. 2/3 of people were after an Orbi trap of some description. Quite a spread across the tribrids, fusions, eclipses, etc. Orbi, just any Orbi, I don't care, anyone will do. The new Explorers. A few people going some of the more specialized ones. So what I nicknamed the Jumbo, whatever the extended mass range name platform is called. But second after that was definitely the Tim's Toffs. So Brooker have garnered quite a lot of interest, I think, with that platform, and a lot of votes. So the size of the text here is proportional to the number of votes for each section. And some people have fairly modest aims. And, you know, it's like, oh, give me a blank checkbook. I just need some nano LC, or I would be after the latest Q-trap from SciX. And the other part down this one was there's several people were voting or interested in getting into imaging of one format or another. So obviously the Flex is a potential imaging platform, and this one as well. And ion mobility was another area. So there's whilst a skew to the Orbi traps, there was you know, and also a diversity of where people are feeling that they would like to go if they could, if they had that unlimited money. And then again, this future section, we were asking what's your greatest challenge coming up over the next 3 years? And surprisingly enough, mid-pandemic, COVID and cost savings were pretty much front and center for the majority of users. And this sort of overlaps with these yellow. So these were all free text forms. So we kind of condensed down people's comments. So COVID, cost saving, avoiding job cuts, retaining staff were all kind of very near at the top of a lot of people's lists. And the other one that's interesting, that's up there at the same level, though, is also this bit about boosting staff skills. So there are lots of comments around the retaining, but also developing staff capability, and that perpetual question about how do you have a career path in core facilities. So that's an interesting one that's on people's radar. And quickly following on from managing to keep your staff is funding for instruments, either in terms of instrument upgrades, instrument maintenance, instrument capacity expansion. And then there are a handful of comments around things like leadership, metabolomics, revenue, that didn't quite pigeonhole into one of those groups. So yeah, it's interesting what people are worrying about at the moment. It certainly gives us ideas for where to put future sessions for this meeting. So just to summarize, I hope that's been a really great insight for all of you into what does an Australian mass spectrometry core facility look like? How do you compare to the MUC facility? Is your option a popular one, or is it a niche activity? There's obviously plenty of caveats to this survey as a whole. One bit is we're quite skewed, obviously, to the omics, particularly proteomics mass spectrometry facilities. We're a little bit, there's a hard balance to strike between the depth of the surveys. We kept on having to try and pare back the number of questions we were asking to make it not too onerous, and we still had some facilities saying, I'd love to do the survey, but I just don't have time. And so we had this balance between getting that insight, but also making the survey easy to collect and not too onerous. So this is where the second half of this session is going to come. We're going to flip the classroom, as it were, and move it on to up to you to say, well, what was the real value that you got out of this survey? What's the must-have questions that we've got to retain? But also, what do we missed? What should we be asking that we haven't asked and haven't covered? And we're going to do that using Jamboard and breakout